Right now, sensation is a very simple concept, right? It's the process where a stimuli is detected by your sense organs, and that information is relayed to the brain via nerve transmission, right? Where the brain then interprets it, in which case it then becomes perception, right? It's very simple, straightforward concept. Sensation requires stimulation. Stimulation of what? It requires the stimulation of sense organs, right? These sense organs, when they are stimulated, where the receptor sites are affected by external agencies, right? They convert that energy. So in the case of your vision, it's electromagnetic energy, right? That light energy, it comes in, it hits the receptors of my eye, right? That's the sense organ. That converts the electromagnetic wave into an electrical impulse, right? Which then travels through all of these different parts of my eye and hits my brain. When my brain, a certain portion of the brain, then decodes that neural impulse and I see the world like I do, right? Same thing for your hearing. When I'm speaking, right, vibrations are going in. It goes in from here into the whatever different parts of cochlea, whatever, right? Goes up, goes through the three bones, hammer, anvil, and incus, right? Goes to the cochlea, stimulates those hair-like substances there, right? And then converts into a nerve impulse, which then goes up the temporal lobe into your auditory cortex, which then interprets all the words that I've just spoken, right? Till the point of interpretation is what sensation is, right? Perception is the organization of all of these sensations to understand the environment, right? So to understand speech, you have to perceive it, right? You have to understand, decode that sensation and understand it. So it's a step after sensation, right? It's a decoding of the neural impulse in a way, right? Now, the process of sensation is in this way, right? There is a stimuli, in this case, say vision or audition. It hits your sensory receptor, so it's in your eye or your ear. All the different type of components take place inside, right? Eventually, it becomes an impulse, a nerve impulse, right? That starts to move within the structures, right? That process is called transduction. The process of conversion of that external energy into neural energy is known as transduction, right? Then it goes to the brain where different parts of it analyze the stimulus, which is then reconstructed into another neural stimulus, which is like it is deconstructed. And then there is a recognition and interpretation of what it was, right? So transduction is the process by which characteristics of a stimulus are converted into nerve impulses. So in this case, light energy enters the eye. So the electromagnetic energy enters the receptor in the eye, which is then converted from electromagnetic energy into the action potential or a neural impulse, right? So this is the action potential. This is then transmitted to the brain via the optic nerve in case of vision, right? Which is then received by the occipital lobe here, right? And the part of the visual cortex. And then they are interpreted by different parts of the brain, and then they go to the frontal lobe, etc., and it will understand what is going on, right? So transduction is one of the favorite questions of the NET exam, right? They'll give it and they'll give you options. What is it? It's basically the conversion of any external energy into neural energy, right? The external energy has to stimulate your sense organ. Now, how many types of sense organs are there? There are 5. There is vision, which is sight. There is audition, which is hearing. There is olfactory, that is smell. There is gustation, which is taste. And there is somesthetic or tactile sense, which is touch, right? All of these have different layers to them, and we will understand each one in depth. Stimulated sense organ is vision. This is basically the detection of electromagnetic waves, what are also referred to sometimes as light waves, by the eye. Right now, there are a whole lot of structures that actually detect that wave and convert it and transduct it into neural impulse. Right, but in reality, there are innumerable number of waves that are there, right? So if you can see this image on the right, any wave that has the wavelength of almost 100 kilometers, right, is a radio wave, right, that can exist at that uh, distance as part of their wavelength, right? And then there's so many others, and then there's only a minuscule amount that we can actually see, right? This extends from 700 nanometers to 400 nanometers, right? This is the range of vision for us, right? And this range itself is divided into different colors that we perceive, right? So this is typically what the rainbow color is, or what is referred to as Vibgyor, moving from top to bottom, that is 400 to 700 nanometers, right? 400 is violet and 700 is red, and in between you have blue, green, yellow, orange, red, right? And one is missing. One of the colors is missing in this diagram. Anyway, right? One of the ways to remember it is that violet, indigo, blue. Okay, violet is right below ultraviolet radiation, right? So ultraviolet is something that we remember very easily. Uh, After ultraviolet is violet, and then so on and so forth. After that, there is red at the bottom, right? Or the other way to remember it is 700 for red, 400 for violet. If you remember either of them, you know that the other one is 400 nanometers or 700 nanometers, right? Usually I remember red as 700, then it makes it easy for me because then it's just descending from there, right? So that's basically the spectrum of vision, right? So the human eye, right, light waves are stimuli that enter the eye and reach the visual cortex in your brain, right? That is in the occipital lobe. Now, the way it works is light waves enter through what is known as the cornea, which the light wave goes through the pupil, into the iris, into the lens, retina, optic nerve, visual cortex, right? So that's basically how the transmission takes place. Um, so this is your eye, right? One normal eye. Cornea is the transparent protective structure surrounded by the aqueous humor, right? So the structure that covers your pupil, etc., is cornea. This is not something that you can see. Even if you look into the mirror, you will not see it, right? That's why it's transparent. But there's a layer that protects the eye, right? So that's cornea. Below the cornea is the pupil, that is the black part, right? Usually, which expands and contracts, right? This dilates or constricts, adjusting to the amount of light, right? Or internal excitement, right? So if there is an arousal, then pupils will dilate. If there is under arousal, pupils will constrict, right? If there's less light, pupils will dilate. If there's more light, pupils will constrict, right? So it maintains the how much light is going to get into your eye basically, right? Then iris surrounds the pupil and they control the size of the pupil. So if the pupil wants to increase, the brain sends the signal, then the iris is like, okay, I'll let you expand, right? If it wants to decrease, then iris helps it decrease. Lenses are the things that hold all of that together, right? And they either become thinner or thicker to focus on different objects. So if you are focusing on your screen right now, everything else that's beyond your screen is slightly blurry, right? So the lens is adjusting to the near side and letting the far side be slightly blurry, right? Or it will become thinner so that you see the further away things, and it becomes thicker when you have to see something close by, right? The lens also inverts the image that you're seeing. So when you see something, right, the light enters through the cornea, pupil, iris into the lens. The lens will invert the entire image, right? So it will go, the top part will actually go to the bottom and the right part will move to the left. So it will become like that, right? That image is then pushed to the retina, right? Retina is the part that is behind your eyeball, right? Which has all the light sensitive receptors, right? And the part of the eye which connects to the brain, basically, right? So the lens reverses the incoming image, that is the stimuli, from right to left and top to bottom and projects it on the retina, right? Later, when this entire process through the optic nerve, etc., goes to the brain reverses this image back to how you might have seen it, right? And therefore, you perceive the image. So there is like a philosophical idea here where lots of philosophers have said that especially Plato. He said that the world that you see, right, is not what the world actually is. So there is one reality, and your view of the world is a interpretation of that reality, right? So you don't see anything in its true form. And then now with science, we sort of know that this is actually true because the image that you see is reversed and then reversed back, right? So in that process, the idea is that some things may get lost. It's an interpretation of the brain, right? So from a philosophical space, that's something very interesting that the lens does, right? The lens is also responsible for the clarity of close vision or far away vision. What is myopia or hyperopia, or what is called nearsightedness, farsightedness, or minus specs and plus specs, right? Uh, so myopia occurs when clear near sight exists, but problem with seeing far away objects is clear, right? This is called nearsightedness. So you can see near things, but you can't see things far away. This is where you put the minus specs, right? This is what most people have. If you're a young person and you have specs, mostly you have specs that is minus in nature. That is, you have nearsightedness, meaning that you can see things that are close by. You can see things that are close by clearly, and things that are slightly far away is slightly hazy to you. This is because the lens is slightly damaged and it's not able to perform its role properly, right? As you get older, or some people even in the young age, right, have hyperopia. This is difficulty in seeing things that are close, right? But far away objects is clear. So now as you get older, you have your both eyesight will suffer in both directions, right? Close and far. But some people, for them, things that are close, right, are not very clear, and things that are far is very clear. So those people are said to have a condition of hyperopia, or what is farsightedness, or the plus specs, right? Um, and then as you get older, you have bipolar specs, that is both plus and minuses there in the specs, right? Depending on where you're looking, you'll adjust your glasses. So that's the role of the lens. It reverses the image from top to bottom, right to left, and it adjusts the waves coming in and how they hit the retina, right? And it sort of is responsible for both myopia and hyperopia. Now retina, right? This is the part that is at the back of your eye, right? That's the seat of light sensitive photoreceptors. Uh, Photoreceptors are receptors that take in the light wave, right? Till now, this has not turned into a neural impulse. Okay, very important to understand. It's still in its wave format, right? So this is sometimes considered to be an extension of the brain. In the retina, there are two types of light sensitive photoreceptors, rods and cones. You all are probably aware of those terms, right? Rods and cones are the first place where light energy is converting to nerve impulses, right? Through things known as photopigments. So your rods and cones have photopigments where light energy hits, they convert the light energy into neural impulse, and then they pass it on to the rest of the brain, right? Now, the retina is a huge space, right? It's your entire eyeball. Now, at the center of the retina is a place called fovea, right? Where there is a lot of cones, but no rods, right? So if this is the retina, right? Right here in the center will be your fovea, where there will be a lot of cones. And as you move to the periphery, you'll have a lot more rods and less cones, right? That's the way they are structured. So rods are mostly present in the periphery, away from the fovea, right? It's more sensitive to light. It's more sensitive to light, not color, okay? It's more sensitive to light, and therefore it functions best under dim light. So in the evenings, right, if you go for a walk, your retina is more active, then your rods are more active than your cones, right? Whereas in the morning, when you're going out and the sun is out, your cones are more active, right? Your rods are useful for dark adaptation because obviously they are more responsible in dim light. They respond better to less light. So dark adaptation is basically when you walk into a dark room from a light room, right? You adjust to the brightness of that room and you begin to see everything under low light. That's called dark adaptation, right? Rods are also responsible for achromatic vision, that is black and white vision, right? There are almost 120 million different rods in one eye. So 240 in both eyes, right? This was found by a guy called Bach. Then you have cones. Cones are present mostly at the center of the retina, which is your fovea, and slowly reduces as you get further away, right? It works best under bright illumination and is responsible for color vision. So the way to remember this is cones for C, color C. That's it. If you know that much, then you know rods are for black and white, right? So rods and cones present in the retina. Retina center is fovea, which is where cones are, which is where color vision takes place. Works best under bright light because color requires a lot of light. That range is there. If there is dim light, then the rods take over and they adapt to the dark area that you find yourself in. So another way to remember it, evenings are responsible for, like rods are responsible for evening or night vision. Cones are responsible for day vision, right? Very basic way if you want to remember it. That's one of the ways that you can use. So rods and cones connect to synapses of bipolar cells, which then have synapses with ganglion cells, which are then connected to optic nerve. So the structure is like there is the retina, which have rods and cones. Behind that, right, you have bipolar cells. Behind that, you have ganglion cells. Behind that, there is the optic nerve. The optic nerve then sends the information to the occipital lobe and the visual cortex, right? So one of the ways to remember this is think of Royal Challengers Bangalore Go, right? It's like a cheering for Royal Challengers Bangalore. So RCB Go, that is rods, cones, bipolar cell, ganglion cell, optic nerve. If a question comes, you always get this correct if you just remember the chant RCB Go, right? Now the interesting thing is, and we don't know why this is that in the fovea, in the center, right, there are no photoreceptors. Only on the sides is there, right? Right at the center of it, there is no photoreceptor. And that place, if the light wave hits, you will not see anything, right? So it's called the blind spot, right? It's very aptly named the blind spot. There are no rods or cones, there are no photoreceptors there, but it's in the fovea, it's in the center of the fovea, which is the center for all the color vision, and the most clear vision you'll see will be based on the fovea. However, there's one spot where you don't see anything, which is called the blind spot, right? And it's not connected to anything behind it, right? This is the basic process. You have this is what happens afterwards, right? Nerve impulses move from optic nerve to the visual cortex, which is then analyzed by the visual association cortex, which then interprets the information from previous memories, knowledge, etc. And then it leads to perceiving something, right? So if this is the object, the light will come like that. It will hit your cornea, right? It will cross through your pupil. The iris will adjust the pupil, it will hit the lens, it will reverse itself, right side will become left, top will become bottom, then it will pass to the retina. In the retina, the white part will be by the rods, right? Near the, because it's more used to black and white vision. The colored part and the more illuminated part will be in the center, which is the fovea, where cones are located, right? All of this will hit your gang bipolar cells, which will then hit the ganglion cells, which will then hit the optic nerve, which will then pass the information behind. Right. The first one was yesterday we watched in that video, right? Thomas Young and Hermann von Helmholtz. These guys gave us the trichromatic theory, right? The trichromatic theory of color says that in the cones, right, there are individual receptors, right? So there are three types of color receptors in the cones. The three types of color receptors are receptors for blue, receptors for green, receptors for red, right? So BGR, right? Christ University BGR campus. Think of it like that, right? Um, or any other way that you can arrange those three: blue, green, red, right? You can be RGB, GBR, whatever you want, right? Blue, green, red are the three types of receptors in the retina, right? So is that when all three are stimulated by the light waves together, it produces white. If they are mixed, then that color is produced. So for example, yellow is a mix of red and green, right? Blue is a mix of yellow is a mix of red and green. Then say violet is a mix of more blue, less green, right? And so on and so forth. Turquoise is a mix of blue and green, and however you want to arrange it after that, right? So there are three types of receptors: blue, red, and green, and different combinations of them lead to different types of colors, right? Uh, this was a good theory. It explained a lot of stuff. A lot of experiments worked with this. However, it did not explain the idea of an after image. So an after image is, say you are looking at your screen right now, and then you close your eyes and you try and see the screen again. There'll be a very different kind of color, right? You'll see like slightly bluish sort of color, maybe a little bit of red also, right? That's an after image. Or another way of thinking of an after image is you look at the screen and then you look at something absolutely white, right? And then the same image will sort of form over there, right? Uh, and the colors will be very different from what they are on your screen. So to explain that, right, an after image occurs when vision sensation persists for a long time after original stimulus is removed. So the visual sensation is different from the original stimulus and cannot be explained by the three color receptor theory, right? So we got Ewald Herring who explained this, the idea of the after image, right? Herring said that he agreed with Young and Helmholtz, and he said that there are three types of cones, right, which have your blue, green, which have three different types of receptors, but they work in pairs, right? So he said that they work in pairs of different wavelengths that hit them. So the receptors are blue and yellow, red and green, and black or white. So you have one receptor for black or white, you have one cone receptor for red or green, and you have another one for blue or yellow, right? When they experimented with this, they found that the after image colors fit very well with this sort of explanation, right? Then Herring took it a step forward and he said that this process does not take place in the eye, but it takes place in the brain. So in a place called lateral geniculate nucleus, which is in the thalamus. So if you remember, if you go back to biopsych, what we understood was thalamus was the place where all the information was processed to different parts, right? Everything goes there and it sends information everywhere. So Herring was one of the first people to find the value of thalamus in terms of vision, right? The issue was that although he said everything was correct in terms of his understanding of the after image, his understanding of the cones was not correct, right? Cones do not work in this paired sort of idea, right? But the after image mechanism, that is the fact that it is located in the thalamus, was right, right? So that is the opponent process theory. Then we came to the dual process theory by Valberg, which is basically a mix of the two. He said that the trichromatic theory was correct about the concept of specific cones having specific photopigments. So blue, green, red is correct, right? However, the and so blue, green, and red was correct according to Valberg. After image took place in the brain, so it was not responsible for neither of the cones were responsible for what happened with the after image. That was something that occurred in the brain, right? And where in the brain? In the visual cortex, basically, right? So he mixed the two ideas, right? Um, so basically now your today's understanding of color vision is still not completely accepted. They still say that we don't really know all the cones that are there, and we don't know if all the cones are only based out of these three photopigments. Um, and but they do accept that after image takes place in the brain, right? It's nothing to do with the receptors in the eye. But there's still a lot of debate going on, and it will continue probably because we don't understand. First of all, we don't understand light waves good enough, well enough, and then inside the eye, what happens is a whole different ball game. We don't even know why the lens inverts the images and all of that, right? Like why that process evolved in the first place. So lots of things to still decipher basically, but this is the best we have right now. Now, in terms of people who have deficiency in color vision, there are usually two types. That is dichromats, which are people who are blind to either seeing blue or yellow or red or green, right? Or you have monochromats who are sensitive only to black or white, which means they can't see any of the other colors. Uh, Again, this is related to sex, where men are more prone to having color deficient vision, right? Audition works slightly differently, right? Uh, this is obviously hearing. Now, electromagnetic waves are for sight. For hearing, these are called pressure waves, right? Which is basically vibrations in a medium, in any form of any type of medium. Usually it's the air, sometimes it's water also, right? So in vacuum, you can't hear anything because vibrations will not take place. These are also referred to as sound waves, and they're a form of mechanical energy, right? So sound has two major characteristics, that is in terms of the graph, right? And in terms of hearing, there's frequency and there is amplitude, right? Frequency is the number of sound waves or cycles per second. So if this is time that is charted on the horizontal axis, the number of waves that take place per second is your frequency. So this is a high frequency wave because there are more number of waves per second. This is a low frequency wave where there are lesser number of waves per second. Okay. Each cycle, that is each wave up and down like that, right? Each cycle is referred to as a hertz, right? 1 hertz is one cycle. A normal human ear can hear between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. You can have sound that is lower than 20 hertz and above 20,000 hertz, but the human ear will not hear it, right? Now, this is the range. Normal hearing is actually between somewhere around 100 hertz to 15,000 hertz, right? Which is the average human thing. This is the range, max and minimum, right? And as you get older, it starts to shrink, right? Now, frequency is related to the pitch of a sound. That is how high or how low the sound is. So how high or how deep a sound is linked with the frequency. So if there are more waves per second, the sound will be higher in pitch, not loud, right? Higher in pitch. So think of, say, the way I remember this is I think of Janice from Friends, and her voice is like, like that, right? So that's high pitch, right? That means there are more waves per second, right? Frequency is higher, more hertz, right? So more cycles of frequency per second, higher pitch, therefore higher hertz, which equals to higher pitch, right? So this sound will have higher pitch than this sound, right? That's frequency. So the amount of waves per second, more waves, more pitch, less waves, less pitch. Not loudness, pitch, right? Then you have amplitude. Amplitude is the vertical size of the wave, right? So how high the wave is, irrespective of how quickly or how slowly it goes per second, it's the height of the wave, right? If the wave is high, sound is loud. If the wave is low, sound is less. So you can have high frequency, low amplitude, low frequency, high amplitude, right? So amplitude is related to loudness. Loudness is then measured in decibels. So dB, right? A normal human ear without it impacting our hearing, right, can hear between say 10 decibel to around 100 decibels is also fine, right? Beyond that, it starts to get really problematic for your ear. Around 140 can actually cause deafness, right? The interesting thing about decibels is that each increase of 10 decibels, so from 0 to 10 decibels, if you're hearing something, it's actually an increase of 10-fold in noise in terms of loudness, right? So increase of 10 decibels is an increase of 10 times the sound. So if you hear, say, and then if you hear, right? If that is like a 10 decibel increase, then that's a 10-fold increase in loudness, right? Which is a huge increase in terms of just magnitude of the sound, right? So audition works in two ways: frequency, amplitude. Frequency is how high or how high pitched or low pitched the sound is, which is linked with the number of waves per second, um, which is called hertz, right? Each cycle is called hertz. And then there is amplitude, that is the height of the wave. So you can have like high frequency, high amplitude waves, which is high pitched and really loud, right? You can have low frequency, right? But really high amplitudes, in which case it will be really loud, but really slow, right? Really low pitch. You can have low pitched, high amplitude sounds, right? Which is already done. And you can have high pitched, low amplitude sound. So it can be really high pitched, but really soft, right? So there's frequency, amplitude. Frequency is linked with pitch. Amplitude is linked with loudness, right? So one weird way to remember this is think of that song called Amplifier, which was very famous at one point. I don't know if all of you know it. That's how I remember it, right? Amplifier. and I think of it being really annoyingly loud as a song, right? So that's how I remember, okay, amplitude is loudness. But you can think of amplitude as like the height of a wave also, right? Amplitude gives you that imagery. Frequency gives you the imagery of how quickly something happens. And how quickly something happens can be linked with pitch, right? So you can create whatever association works for you as long as you remember it. Now the human ear, right? The sound waves, the vibrations in the atmosphere, right, enter the ear from this thing called the pinna, right? The pinna is created in a way where it sucks in, where it's like a magnet for vibrations, right? Now, and it's shaped also in a way where all that vibration passes through and goes through this hole over here, right? Which is the starting of your ear technically, right? You have pinna, which is the external or the visible part of the human ear. It helps in funneling the sound into the ear, right? Then you have the auditory canal, which is the passageway to the eardrum. So where all that dirt gets stuck is the auditory canal, right? When you're cleaning all that dirt, sometimes you'll hit one uh, membrane sort of thing, right? That is your eardrum. So people always tell you, be careful when you're like cleaning out your ears, you might burst your eardrum, right? So there is your pinna, this is the external ear. Pinna, auditory canal, and the eardrum inside. It's also sometimes referred to as the tympanic membrane, right? That's the part which actually vibrates, right? With all this vibration coming in, all that noise coming in, it passes through the canal and then it hits the eardrum, which vibrates, right? That vibration passes the information to the inner ear, which is present over here somewhere in between this much, right? Uh, and that vibration sends the sound wave into the middle ear, right? The middle ear comprises of three bones called hammer, that's the first one, which is attached to the eardrum. Then there is something called anvil, and then there is stirrup, right? So different names, hammer, anvil, stirrup are the non-scientific names. The scientific names are malleus, incus, and stips, right? They function to increase the amplitude of sound waves by more than 30 times. So the loudness of sound, right? So sound comes in, the vibration, eardrum will vibrate, then it will pass through the middle ear through hammer, anvil, or stirrup, or malleus, incus, or stips. I remember it as has or MIS. Um, the three of them vibrate to increase the amplitude by more than 30 times, right? Once that happens, then it hits the inner ear, right? So if you look at this pinna, this is the outer ear, auditory canal, these are your bones, right? Uh, and then it goes past here, right? It goes inside from the three bones and it first hits the oval window, okay? It hits the oval window. Um, and then from there, the other parts of audition takes place, okay? So the inner ear comprises of the cochlea, the basilar membrane, and the organ of Corti, three most important parts of the inner ear. The cochlea is here. It's like a coiled nail-shaped tube. Think of it like the back of a snail usually is like this, right? It's around 3.5 inches, so very small, and it's filled with fluid, right? So the vibrations from the hammer, anvil, and stirrup send the fluid here, right, into motion. Then that fluid moves, and remember that the amplitude has increased by more than 30 times, right? So that's really a huge amount of steering that takes place. And then when that vibration when it hits the liquid, the vibration sort of reduces, right? This is general physics where in air sound is louder because it passes, the vibrations are quicker than underwater, right? Then inside the cochlea you have the basilar membrane which also vibrates based on this water vibration that takes place, right? And then from the basilar membrane the organ of Corti, which is inside here somewhere, right, that also starts to vibrate, right? But the organ of Corti has hair-like cells. So those are the receptors of audition, basically, right? So they receive that vibration and then they are the actual receptors of sound, right? So till now, it's actually just sound waves that came in, right? Increased in amplitude, went through this liquid, right? Passed through the basilar membrane and went into the organ of Corti, where they were finally received by the uh, hair-like cells that are there, right? Those things then pass the information into the auditory nerve, which then pass the information to the auditory cortex in your brain, right? That's the process. So it's like this. Sound wave strikes the eardrum, Pressure is created on the hammer, anvil, and stirrup of the middle ear at the oval window. This pressure sets the fluid inside the cochlea into motion, right? The fluid vibrates the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane. This causes a bending of the hair cells in the organ of Corti, right? Which then release neurotransmitters which attach to the auditory nerve, which send the impulses to the brain. Right? This is the basic function. Wave comes, vibrates, increases vibration inside the middle ear, right? Goes through the liquid into the cochlea, into the basilar membrane, which sends that vibration into your organ of Corti, which have the actual receptors of sound, which are hair-like. They receive the sound, they release the neurotransmitters, which then convert it into neural impulse and send that sound to the brain, right? And where in the brain it gets deconstructed, and the brain sort of understands what it has heard, right? So it goes to the vernix area basically. Now, in terms of judging pitch and loudness, there is a difference in terms of how it works. Okay, in terms of loudness, high amplitude sound waves cause hair cells to bend more. So because obviously increase in amplitude 30 times takes place, right? So if it's already loud and then it increases 30 times, it bends more and it releases more neurotransmitters, right? Which increase the number of firing of neurons in the auditory nerve, which then increase the sound, right? For pitch, there are two different theories that are there, right? For loudness, we know that what happens is sound comes, it's really loud, it releases more neurotransmitter, therefore you hear more noise, very basically, right? For pitch, first we had the frequency theory by Rutherford, right? Rutherford said that the firing of auditory neurons is equal to the frequency of the wave. So if the wave was 100 hertz, the amount of frequency of your neurons that will fire for action potential is also 100, right? But then what we realized is 100 for till 1000 hertz this made sense. Okay, that much release of neurons at that speed could take place, right? However, after 1000 hertz neurons cannot go beyond that, right? Neurons work on electricity, which works on the principle of light, which is that is the maximum speed it can achieve, right? There is a maximum amount of speed that action potentials can achieve no matter how much stimulation is there, right? Because there are limited number of calcium and limited number of potassium that is there, right? So there's a certain amount only where action potential can be really fast. That's plus 13 millivolt, right? Beyond that, it didn't make sense. And we can hear sounds till 20,000 hertz. So till 1000 hertz is this made sense in terms of pitch, right? That is the highness or lowness of sound. But after that, it didn't make sense anymore, right? So then we got another theory called the place theory by Helmholtz and further improved by Bexey, which is basically that high frequency waves, right, that were high pitched, they reached their height near the oval window, that is after the middle ear, while low frequency wave produced slow waves that peak near the cochlear canal. So if it was a high frequency wave, it reached its height in terms of frequency near the oval window, whereas if it was a low frequency wave, it peaked in the cochlea, right? So in two different places, two different types of frequencies were having effects, right? So that gave us the first idea of how we perceive pitch. High pitch is perceived basically, its highest point is near the oval window, right? Before it enters the inner ear, whereas low frequency waves, that is the deeper sound, is heard really in the cochlear canal, in the cochlea, right? That is in the inner ear. The other thing that the place theory said was within the cochlea also, right? There are different places in which the hair cells get released, right? So the pitch perception is different. So in the lower part, high frequency waves affect, and in the upper part of the your hair cells, the low pitched sound is heard, right? So it was depending on the place in the hair cells and place in the ear that they reach their peaks that decided whether a sound was high pitched or low pitched. Whereas for amplitude, that is whether a sound is loud or soft, takes place depending on the actual amplitude, right? There's no specific, it just depends on the amount of neurons that are released. Whereas frequency till 1000 volt, 1000 hertz made sense that way, but after that it didn't make sense. Then we realized that for high frequency waves, that is high pitched sound, the height of that wave was reached in the oval window, that is after the middle ear, after hammer, anvil, and stapes. And for low frequency waves, that took place in the cochlea, right? The height of its thing. Therefore, even the hair cells in the organ of Corti were in different points where the frequency took place, right? The bending took place at different points. Last thing is that in terms of sound localization, that is the ability to recognize where the particular sound came from, whether it was on the left hand side, right hand side, behind you, or in front of you. It's really dependent on the difference between the spacing of the ears, right? So if a sound comes from here, it processes faster through this part of your entire system, and it takes time for it to come here and then process. That's how you know the where the sound came from, right? So how much time it took and how much intensity that you hear it. So if the sound comes from your left hand side, you'll hear it faster and it'll be more intense compared to sound, the same sound when it has to travel that much more and come to your right hand side, right? So this difference between your ears allows you to localize sound. He said that pitch is based on the fact that the frequency of the sound wave and the frequency of the firing of the neurons in the auditory nerve is the same, right? So if just in a very basic sense, think of it like this. If there is 1,000 hertz sound, the neurons will also fire at the same rate of 1,000. Okay. But the issue was that researchers quickly realized that the neurons can only fire up to a certain level of like processing, right? Which is plus 30 millivolt that we studied in action potential, right? There's only that much intensity that a neuron can have, right? Which means that if the frequency, the maximum frequency where the neuron and the frequency can match is when the frequency is at 1000 hertz, 30 millivolt of energy. That's it, right? When the hertz increases, right, when the frequency of sound increases beyond 1000 hertz, that is 2000, 4000, 20,000, the action potential cannot keep up, right? The neurons can only fire at this maximum rate, which means that for higher level pitch, right, this theory did not explain anything. It explained everything correctly till 1000 hertz, where the matching of the neuron release, right, the neuron firing and the frequency could be met, right, 1000 hertz and 30 millivolt of intensity of audition, right, firing. When it went above, this didn't increase. This stayed maximum this much only, right? So then researchers realized that this doesn't really work. It works till 1000 hertz. After that, it doesn't work. This theory doesn't explain why what happens when you have 20,000 hertz frequency, right? For that, came up with the Helmholtz and your Becksky came up with the place theory. The place theory was that for high pitch sounds, that is above 1000, 2000, 5000, 18,000, 20,000 hertz sound, the height of the wave of the frequency, right, is reached at the oval window, which is after your middle ear, after your all of this auditory canal, it hits your middle ear, your hammer, anvil, and stapes. Then that at oval window, high pitch sounds reach their maximum intensity, and then from there they just drop in intensity, right? That's how the brain realizes that that's a high pitch sound. Whereas for the low pitch sound, right, sound that is less wave per second, those sounds, their most intensity is felt in the cochlea, in the cochlear canal, right, where that liquid thing is, that snail's backside, right? That's where the most intensity is felt for low wave, low frequency sound, right? So the place theory was basically saying that when you have high pitch sound, you hear it somewhere else technically. You hear it at the oval window, and when it's a low frequency sound, you hear it in the cochlea, right? And then they bend the hair cells also differently. Whereas the earlier part of the organ corti, right, is bent by the high pitch sound, and further away part of the organ corti is bent by the low frequency sound. Now the third very important form of sensation is for taste, or what is also referred sometimes to as gustation, right? Now, taste is very simple. You put something in your mouth, your tongue has taste receptors, which send the information to the brain, which perceives taste, right? Now, these receptors are chemical receptors. So basically, when you eat something, your teeth chew all of it out into smaller bits, right? It mixes with the saliva, which then lodges into these receptors, and immediately neural activity is created. So this is slightly different than vision and audition, right? For both of these, for a length of time, the original uh, wave exists, right? Like the original form of energy exists. Um, However, for taste, it's immediate, right? You eat, chew, and immediately you taste something. Even sometimes when you don't chew, you put a chocolate there just like that and let it melt. As soon as it becomes smaller, immediately you'll have sensation of taste, right? Um, so, and then there's also the evolutionary trait where we can instinctually understand when there is something toxic or something that is spoiled. When you eat it, you'll immediately know, right? So that's a very interesting evolutionary thing that is there, right? With our taste buds. There are close to 9,000 different taste buds, right? 9,000 different receptors. Uh, there are four major qualities that we thought we used to taste. This was by Hans Herring, right? He said we can taste sour, sweet, salty, bitter, right? Sour, sweet, salty, bitter. Then Lindemann later came out and said there's one more kind of taste which is called umami, which is brothy taste. So think of like a soup, thuppa, right? These are brothy tastes. Uh, so they might be sweet, they might be sour, they might be salty, but they'll also have this really thick, foamy sort of feeling, right? So basically, five qualities of taste: sour, sweet, salty, bitter, and umami, right? When you have umami, it increases the intensity of other tastes. That's why like Chinese food and Thai food and all taste so lovely, right? Earlier it was believed that different parts of the tongue have different receptors. So if you eat something sour, it would go to the sour end, and if you eat something sweet, it would go to the sweet end, and all of that kind of thing. Today we know that that's not true. All receptors can work with all of it. Um, and there is no particular part of the tongue that is responsible for some things. However, there are zones where these things are more active, right? So when you put something chili on the tip of your tongue, it's really like it feels really weird, right? It's really spicy because the main receptors of something that is sour bitter mix is not there, obviously. Um, and when you have something chili, it's burning the neural receptor, right? So you put it anywhere, it'll feel the same. And the rest of the tastes are in every other part of the tongue, right? So that's it. That's all there is about taste. Then you have olfaction or smell, right? The sense of smell. Now, this is obviously through your nose. Receptors are long cells located at the nasal cavity and have lots of membranes, right? So you smell something, it goes through here. There are hairs inside, right? Which have long membranes, receptors around the nasal canal, which connect to the brain. There are almost 40 million receptors in this much area, right? This entire sinus area, almost 40 million receptors are there, right? These are known as cilia, right? And then there are olfactory bulbs that receive neural impulse from all of this cilia, and they pass the information to the brain, to the forebrain, right? So your nose is the only organ where it has a direct connection with the brain. There is no other like different kind of uh, nerve that connects the brain and the nose, right? You smell something and immediately it goes to the olfactory bulb and it hits the brain, right? So therefore, one of the things that you notice is if you go into malls and all, right, and you go to specific shops, they have very specific scent across the different shops that are there. So if there is a shop in Delhi, there's one in Bombay, there's one in say Bangalore, and that's Adidas, for example. It will have the same smell in all three of these stores. The idea is that people register smell and they remember smell better because there is no uh, let's say there is no diminishing of the smell. There's direct connection with the brain, right? So the memory lasts longer and it's much more stronger as a associator. So if you feel good in an Adidas store, you'll remember that smell. And when you go back to an Adidas store, you might feel good. And if you feel good, you might go and buy something, right? So the odorous chemicals has limited receptor olfactory bulb and they're coded in the brain, right? Basically, that's your olfaction. Uh, Now, there's another idea of pheromones that are there, right? These are natural odors that our bodies release. Um, for human beings, pheromones are not as well registered, so you don't smell pheromone, right? Although we have evidence to suggest that pheromones affect our behavior, right? Um, but we don't smell it. There is no particular smell associated with pheromones, right? Um, However, they are chemical receptors that are there. Those are the natural scent that our body releases, and it does have an effect on the brain and our behavior, right? So one of the things that these pheromones are linked with is the menstrual synchrony that is there, right? So where women, if they live together for too long or they hang out very often, their menstrual cycle gets synced, right? It starts to begin at the same time. So that's related with pheromones, again related with your nose, although you don't smell anything, right? This was given to us by Martha McClintock, okay? Then you have the somesthetic or tactile or skin or body sense, right? So this is your touch basically, but the somesthetic sense is of three different types actually. So there is touch, which is feeling of pain, temperature, cold, hot, right? Pressure. These are all related with the skin, right? The sense organ of skin. But your body sense, kinesthetic is another one, which is basically your balance, and equilibrium is about whether your basically there is like some motion and all going on and you're being able to balance with that, right? So kinesthetic is just body awareness, your sense of your own body, where is what and what you're moving by how much and at what speed, that sort of thing. Equilibrium is more or less balance, and touch is about pain, pressure, all of that kind of thing, right? Temperature. So touch has four major characteristics. It's very important. Pressure is one, pain is another, temperature is the third one, right? Pressure, pain, temperature. Pressure is felt by the Pacinian corpuscles, right? It's also linked with free nerve endings and basket cells, but it's mostly to do with the Pacinian corpuscles, right? Pain is felt by free nerve endings. This you can remember by when if you get a cut, you feel pain because the nerves are sort of cut, right? There's some opening, free nerve endings are there, and therefore you're feeling pain. Warmth and cold is felt just by the skin receptors by itself, right? You feel cold or hot just by the skin existing. Pressure is felt when below the skin there are these things called the Pacinian corpuscles, right, which feel pressure and then they decide whether okay, this is too much or too less. Pain is when there is free nerve endings. So if you press like that, right, what you're basically doing, if you pinch somebody, you're creating free nerve endings, right? Because obviously that's small, you can't see, and that's exposed and that feels pain, right? So touch has three characteristics actually: pressure, pain, temperature. Then pain, sometimes this again, you must have heard about this, where if the pain is too much, sometimes you don't feel it, right? Lots of people will report saying that, like, I got into an accident or something like that, and I didn't feel pain, right? This has happened with me. I've gotten into a bike accident, I've somersaulted, I've landed on my teeth, and then like, it cut my lip from inside. I was bleeding very profusely. But at that moment, I was just sitting there and I was not feeling pain because I was in sort of shock, right? Like I somersaulted and everything else. So I was not feeling pain at that moment, right? So this is linked with what is known as the pain gate theory, right? This was given by Malzak and Wall. Pain gate theory is basically saying that the spinal cord, right, has a gate which decides whether to send the signal of pain to the brain or not. If it sends the signal, you perceive pain. If it doesn't send the signal, you don't perceive pain, right? So the brain technically decides whether this is too much or too little, right? If it's really a lot, it will close down, it will shut down, you'll get into coma, right? Because the pain is so much that the brain knows it cannot handle it. So it will just stop everything and you'll get into coma. A lower stage of that is that the brain knows that this is too much to bear, right? But it's not enough to shut down all the bodily processes. Therefore, it will block, it will tell the spinal cord block all that pain, right? So the spinal cord will use something known as the substance P and it will block all of that. These are again molecules that will release into your synapse and they will block all that pain, right? And when the pain is not too much, your brain will be like, oh, I can bear this, I'll feel it, and then you feel pain. So if somebody kicks you and you feel pain, right, that's because the brain has decided that is enough. If you get a cut and you feel pain, the brain has decided, okay, that much I can bear. But like if you get into an accident or something like that, the rest of the body is so aroused that the brain is like, I cannot deal with pain at this moment, leave it. So the pain will get blocked at the spinal cord by substance P, right? And if it's too much, then the brain will say that, oh, cannot deal with this at this point too much, let's block everything, right? And all systems block, only important bodily functions are working, right? The other thing is that the skin receptors are located in the sensory somatosensory cortex of the brain. Then the second type, right, this was all about touch. Then you have kinesthetic sense, which is the feedback one receives from one's muscles and joints about the position and movement of the body. So for example, right now when I'm talking to you and you can see on my hand moving all this crazy way, right? I'm never hitting my laptop. I'm never hitting my face. I'm never hitting anything that is around me, right? This is the kinesthetic sense. This is when I move my hand, my muscles give me feedback saying that, okay, Bhaskar, enough, don't move more than this, right? Don't move your body more than this much or you'll hit something. Or when you're trying to kick a ball, right? You kick a ball and then your body doesn't keep extending, it falls back, right? That's all kinesthetic sense. When you're batting, for example, and you hit a shot, your hand doesn't keep going up and up and up, and it just doesn't keep going up like that, right? Or when you ball, it's not like your hand keeps rotating like this, right? These are all a kinesthetic sense, right? That the body has realized, okay, it has reached its movement end, it has reached its position, that's it, right? So these are how this works is these receptors are located at the nerve endings of muscles or joints or tendons, right? Which are known as proprioceptive receptors. These send signals to the brain saying that, okay, enough movement, no more movement. So you stop, right? You've gone far enough, no more extension, right? Or maybe you can extend a little bit more, don't go more than this, right? All of this feedback, this kinesthetic feedback of how much you can move your body, how much it's required to move, and you can't move beyond a point. This is known as the kinesthetic sense, right? And this is done by the proprioceptive receptors that are located in your muscles and joints and tendons, right? The third type is the vestibular or equilibrium sense, which is basically your sense of balance, right? Your sense of body orientation, saying that, okay, I'm looking forward, I'm looking left, I'm looking right, right? This is based in the inner ear. I didn't touch upon this that time because I wanted to come to this point. In the inner ear, right, there are three semicircular canals, right, where there is liquid which sort of moves as you move your head. So if you're moving your head left to right, up and down, the liquid in the inner ear of those three semicircular canals are also moving in conjunction to give you the sense of control and balance, that you're not going crazy and like you don't puke and all of that, right? So that movement of the liquid in those vestibular sacs gives you the ability to have a position of your body and be aware of it, right? So this part of the inner ear, these canals, right? These are the things responsible for any form of balance that is there, right? The one time in your life where two times actually generally in your life where this balance will get messed up is when you drink, right? When you drink, this system sort of goes crazy. The cerebellum is no longer in control. And when you move your head like that, you'll feel like the whole world is going like upside down and all of that. That's because the vestibular organs are not being able to process the movement, right? Cerebellum is not sending the right signal. Therefore, one of the things that the body will do is it will think like, oh, this is like an emergency situation. Something has gone off. It will puke, right? Puking means the release of the toxin. That's what the brain will assume, that there's some toxic thing going on. It doesn't understand it. I'll puke. Once I puke, maybe that toxin will go away, poison will go away, and I'll be fine, right? Which in this case happens to be alcohol, too much alcohol. So all that alcohol will get released. So after puking, people generally feel like they are no longer high, basically, right? So that's the vestibular system working. The other time this happens is where you are having motion sickness. So if you're on the hilly terrain, what's basically happening is your eyes are still straight, right? It's still seeing the road and it's still seeing the road like that, but your ear is realizing that your whole body is moving this way or that way, right? It's keeping on going like that, but your eyes are telling that it's straight only, right? So that disagreement causes a sensory conflict, right? That one part of your brain is thinking, "No, I'm straight, like nothing is wrong." The other part of your brain is saying that, no, I'm moving in all forms, left, right, like that, right? This conflict again will tell the brain that something is not right, and the way it will react is by puking, right? So three things that are related with touch. One is your sense of pressure, pain, or temperature, which is related to the skin. Then there is the sense of knowing how much your body is moving and getting feedback from your muscles and your tendons saying, okay, this is enough movement, no more movement, you can move a little bit more, right? You're sitting in a particular kind of position. All of that is kinesthetic sense. And then you have the vestibular sense, which is basically your sense of balance, right? Saying that irrespective of how fast I move my head, I still feel like I'm here, like I don't get any form of, say, I don't faint or I don't feel like nauseous or anything like that because my systems are working right now, right? But if you intake toxins basically or drugs, then the system goes haywire and therefore you engage in puking or purging, right?